How many of you identify as a songwriter? And if you do or not, how many of you think like a songwriter? This is a question I ask a lot of people. And surprisingly to me, so many of them who are looking to improve and develop their songwriting call themselves aspiring songwriters or beginner songwriters. I am a huge believer in identity mindset as a creative person. And one of the most important and powerful lessons I have learned as a songwriter wasn't even about songwriting. It was how I think about myself. So I'm going to share some of the ways in which I've shifted my creative mindset and began to identify as the songwriter I want to be, and just how impactful that has been on my songwriting journey. Before we get into that though, if you're new here, my name is Celine and I've been writing songs now for 3 decades, but I've only been identifying as a songwriter for about half that time. Now, you may be thinking, what the heck is the difference? Well, let me tell you, it is huge. And once I realised how huge this was and how I needed to change my creative mindset to start identifying as a songwriter, it had a massive impact on my creative output. So if you want to write songs more consistently and actually enjoy the process, then working on your mindset is just as important as working on your melodies. A healthy creative mindset helps you to create an environment where your songs will thrive. Every action is a vote for the type of person you want to become. And this is taken from the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. And it's a book that has had a really massive, profound impact on me as a creative person and on my songwriting over the years. I actually reread the book quite often, normally around the beginning of the year when I'm trying to set goals and establish new habits. It's taught me so much about how to develop those new habits, how to focus on manageable goals, and most importantly, how to think like a songwriter every day. I used to ask myself things like, how do I get better at songwriting? Which would lead me to answers like, I need to learn more music theory, or I should co-write with more people. Now these are not wrong answers at all. But what I realised though is I was asking myself the wrong questions. Instead, I should have been asking myself things like, what would a songwriter do today? Or, if I was a songwriter, how would I be spending my time today? And that helped me realise really quickly that I had been waiting until maybe I'd written X amount of songs until I would start feeling like a songwriter. I just kind of thought I would know once I'd written enough songs to be able to call myself a songwriter. But what I learnt when I started adopting the identity of a songwriter is that I can write whenever I want. And I should be writing every day, even just a little bit. Now, it's almost in this kind of instance, I like a fake it till you make it kind of attitude, but it's not quite. What I started thinking like was, I've got a few hours of free time today. What would a songwriter be doing with a few hours of free time? Or, I don't have an idea to write a song about. What would a songwriter be doing in this instance? Or maybe even, I've started 5 songs recently, but I don't really feel like finishing any of them. What would a songwriter do with this situation? You kind of get the idea. But the shift in mindset and identity really helped me start thinking like a songwriter, even before I really felt like one. But it in turn led me to act like a songwriter. And as soon as I started doing this, I saw my creative output and my processes get better and better. I was using my time better. I was finishing more songs. I was writing better songs. And I was saying yes to more opportunities because that's what songwriters do. Now, a lot of people struggle with this a little bit because of imposter syndrome, but I kind of forged forwards anyway, and my imposter syndrome just almost melted away overnight. And I think that was because I was writing more songs, because I am a songwriter, and that's what songwriters do. My imposter syndrome actually melted away overnight. My inner critic was focused on just the phases of my songwriting that I wanted it to be present in, and I was creating momentum. Because I was writing more songs, I was writing better songs because I'm a songwriter, and that's what songwriters do. And weirdly, I've kind of gone through a very similar mindset shift again this year, as I've gone from being more of a performing artist, songwriter in my own right, and moving more now into a songwriting coaching role. And I had to go through this same identity process so I could start thinking like a songwriting coach. I had let the imposter syndrome creep back in a little bit, and I wasn't sharing these videos and what I was doing straight away because I didn't want to, because I didn't feel like I was qualified to be a songwriting coach. But I've got 30 years of experience that I want to share with people. But now I've started identifying as a songwriting coach, and I ask myself things like, how would a songwriting coach approach X or Y? And as a songwriting coach, how can I leverage my experience so that others can learn from it? And that small shift in how I identified, like back when I started identifying as a songwriter, it really, really matters. Now, one of the ways in which identifying as a songwriter has really helped me is in how I can alter and even control my self-narrative, the things I tell myself about being a songwriter. An example of this is early on in my songwriting process and journey, I used to wait until inspiration hit me before I'd sit down and write a song. And this is actually something I hear a lot from other people when talking about songwriting. But when I used to say that to myself, it meant that I used to actually tell other people the same thing, that I only write when I'm inspired. And when you're telling other people that that's how your songwriting works, you start believing it, even though it's not necessarily true. Now, if any of you have romanticised about being a creative person and acting on inspiration or waiting for the muse to inspire you, this is the creative dream, but it's not really practical in developing your craft. Especially if you're considering taking up songwriting beyond the hobby level, but I've got another video coming up about that, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it if that's you. But I managed to learn and correct my self-narrative by identifying as a songwriter. So I took that self-belief of I only write when I'm inspired, and I rewrote the narrative. So again, asking myself, what would a songwriter do? It meant I quickly realised that songwriters write even when they are not inspired to write. So I then sought out how they do that. What things do songwriters do to make sure that if they have time to write, that they've got material or things to work with so they can write songs whenever they want? But what I quickly learned was, instead of finding something to write about every time they want to write, songwriters collect inspiration to use whenever they are songwriting. So they can write whenever they need to write or want to write. They're not waiting for some mystical energy to inspire them to write a song. They've got the tools and the processes in place so they can write whenever they want to. Now, I've got a video from a few weeks back talking about ideation and the skill of having ideas and how you can collect them for situations such as this. I'll link it down in the description if you want to go and take a look at that. And it led me on to rewiring some other creative mindsets that I didn't really want to have anymore. So the best way I did that was journaling. I kind of brain dumped. I downloaded onto my notebook all the things I used to tell myself about how my songwriting process is, how I came to start songwriting, where I want to be as a songwriter. Now I was identifying as a songwriter. And there were so many things that I found out about myself that was actually holding me back. One of the biggest ones is I wrote down that I prefer to write songs on my own. And it wasn't even true. What the truth was is I had very rarely actually experienced a proper co-writing situation, but I'd convinced myself that I just prefer to write songs on my own because I think that was easier for me, rather than push myself out of my comfort zone and try and set more co-writes up. I was staying comfortable and easy, and it was meaning I was hampering my song development. So again, I asked myself, why had I not been doing more co-writes? And that's when I kind of realised it was probably because I was comfortable writing on my own and I didn't want to move out of my comfort zone because maybe my imposter syndrome would think those people won't want to write songs with me, or maybe my inner critic would slow the whole process down and I'd be a bit embarrassed. And there's so many more little self-talks and self-narratives that I was telling myself that weren't even true. It's just that actually I was comfortable. I was working in my comfort zone and I didn't want to push myself too far outside of it. Now, as songwriters and creative people in general, we need to explore and experiment often. And for me, especially with co-writing. Co-writing brings in new opportunities, new ideas, new thoughts, new genres, new backgrounds. So much into that melting pot that is songwriting can come from a co-writer or two. I wasn't thinking about getting into the realms of some of these really commercial hits that are out these days that have maybe got 12 to 15 songwriters, but certainly pushing out of my comfort zone to spend time writing with at least one other person in the room. So what I did, I set a bit of a challenge for myself to do 5 co-writes with 5 brand new people I'd never written with before. And I had mixed results. 2 of them weren't really great experiences for me. They came out with songs, but I didn't enjoy working with those people just because of the way they worked versus how I like to work. 2 of them I quite enjoyed, and I've written with those people since, and our relationship is kind of moving on and developed. But there was one that absolutely blew me away. I was so inspired after that songwriting session that we booked another session straight away to start a second song, because we wrote a whole song in like 3 hours. I went home that night, wrote another song myself because I was so inspired after working with that person. And then the second time we met, we wrote 2 songs in the space of 3 hours. It was really powerful connection. And I never would have done that if I'd have believed my self-narrative of I only enjoy songwriting when I do it on my own. And the whole process of relearning that, and it's just one of the self-narratives. I haven't got time to talk about all the different ones that have happened, but just that one has changed my songwriting for the better in so many ways. The author Neil Donald Walsh is famously quoted as saying, "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone," and I could not agree more. So I managed to change how I identify. I wasn't identifying as a songwriter, just like so many people I talk to. But once I started identifying as a songwriter, things really started moving for me. And the general creative mindset that identity brought for me snowballed to the point where all my self-narratives were then rewritten. And the things that I was telling people and I believed about myself were coming true. Not the negative ones, but the new ones that aligned with my identity as a songwriter. Mindfulness is so important as a creative person. Looking after your creative energy and your processes and your organization as a songwriter is so important. And that's why I'm trying to get across to you guys just how good having a creative mindset is for your songwriting. And writing songs isn't just about chords and melodies and clever rhymes. It's about how you feel about what you're writing, how you feel about what's happening in the world, and how you express that emotion in songs. Because if you're not feeling great, then you might not be able to write, or the songs that you write might have that kind of negative connotation in them. So I always like to make sure that I've got a nice, clear headspace, that my creative mindset and my creative energy, are really well looked after. And because I identify as a songwriter, I check in with that identity on a regular basis through journaling by asking myself, what would a songwriter do? And it all helps me think clearer. I mean, just making these videos to share with you guys and identifying as a songwriting coach and as somebody with experience that is worth sharing with other people so that others can take away from what I've already learned over the years. It's so important to have a direction and to be organised and to be productive for my own sanity. Now, we don't necessarily think about creative productivity because Creativity is supposed to be fun and relaxing and an enjoyable experience. And if we start thinking about productivity and organisation, then it definitely becomes less so. But actually, once I started paying attention and prioritising my organisation, productivity and my creative mindset, it affected my songs in the most positive way. Mindfulness is such a big part of that. To be kind to yourself, to look after your processes, to make sure that you can write songs whenever you want to write songs, means being organised, means actually being productive, planning sessions, planning co-writes, rather than waiting for inspiration or the muse to strike. You are in control of your songwriting. And I can only tell you from my experience, but that has been really, really positive. That has been really powerful for me to learn to take control of my own songwriting so that I know where everything's at and I can be free and clear whenever I approach it. And I mentioned being kind to myself because when I'm kind to myself, I follow a routine. And that's just me, that's how I like to work. I realised this through many reflection journaling sessions, but if I've got a routine, and that includes a songwriting routine, so songwriting processes, plans, organised song snippets, organised notebook of where I'm at with different songs, it clears my head, there's no overwhelm anymore, and I write more freely. And I found out that when I'm tired or exhausted, I'm very unlikely to want to start finishing songs that are half written. But I think I've gone on for long enough now about this creative mindset business. I probably could talk for hours about all these different things that have really impacted my songwriting in a positive way. Just remember though, your creative energy is precious, and having the right mindset and identifying and thinking like a songwriter means you can put routines and processes and organisation and productivity into your songwriting journey to create a much more flourishing output of songs. Working on your mindset is just as important as working on your chords and your melodies. And a healthy mindset creates an environment where your songwriting can thrive. Trust me on that one. And if you're interested in finding out some ways to make some new creative habits while talking about this creative mindset, then you might enjoy this video up here where I talk about exactly that. And I'll see you in the comments.